May 1842. 6 years had passed since the troops of Santa Anna massacred 342 Texans in Goliad, and I still carried the weight of those deaths like stones in the chest. Each name recorded in the memorial we helped erect was a reminder that Texas's freedom was paid with blood to 2 good men for this world. But they were not ghosts of the past that brought me to the plains south of Goliad in that spring. President Mirabeau Lamar had been in charge of a delicate mission, negotiating with region farmers about the expansion of commercial routes towards Rio Grande. The Republic needed money, and the Texa cattle represented our best hope to establish stable trade with Mexico. Irony did not escape me. 6 years earlier, we fought against the Mexicans. Now, we needed to negotiate with them. Houston City had departed on Monday, carrying official documents and a modest gold pouch for expenses. The trip should last 5 days. 2 to get to Goliad, 2 for the meetings, 1 to return. Simple, straightforward, without complications. Texas has always had other plans for men who believe in simplicity. On Thursday afternoon, when I approached Colonel Fannon's farm, named after the dead commander in the massacre, the sky began to change in a dismissing way. It was not the gradual transformation that accompanies normal storms. It was as if someone was erasing the world with a gigantic brush. Ranger felt the change before me. His ears moved nervous, capturing sounds that my human ears could not detect. He diminished his step without pulling the reins, his head turning constantly to observe the horizon. "Calm down, old friend," I muttered. But my own voice sounded tense. "It's just a spring storm." But I knew I was lying. In 49 years of life, most of them in Texas, had witnessed hundreds of storms. This was different. The wind arrived. First, not as a growing breeze, but as a solid air wall that swept the plain with sudden and violent force. Ranger hung up against the blast, his tense muscles under my saddle. The high grass bowed in perfect waves, creating hypnotic patterns that stretched to the horizon. And then came the silence. Not the gradual silence that precedes normal storms when animals hide and birds stop singing. This was a sudden and complete silence, as if all sound had been sucked from the world. Not even the wind was noise as I passed my ears. It was in this impossible silence that I heard the first voice. It did not come from any specific direction. He seemed to emerge from his own air, low and indistinct, as someone whispering the great distance. I pulled the reins, stopping grinding in the middle of the narrow track that cut the plains. "Is there anyone there?" I shouted, my voice echoing strangely in artificial silence. No answer. Only the persistent whisper that seemed to circulate around me. The sky darkened dramatically, as if the sun had been erased by a gigantic hand. But they were not normal clouds that blocked the light. It was a dense, almost solid darkness that moved against the wind in standards that challenged any meteorological logic. And then it started to rain. But it was not water that fell from the darkened sky. The first drops that hit my skin were hot. Too hot. When I raised my hand to examine the liquid, my fingers stained red. Blood. It was raining blood. Ranger began to dance nervously, his hooves slipping into the rapidly forming mud. It was not ordinary mud. It had a viscous, sticky consistency that stuck to his hooves as tar. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, and my blasphemy echoed through the air as if it had been shouted in a cathedral. The voices became more distinct. Not a voice, but hundreds, maybe thousands. They whispered in English, Spanish, and in tongues that I could not identify. All spoke at the same time, creating a murmur that grew in volume and intensity. And then I began to distinguish words. Help. Us. Revenge. Not forgotten. Goliad. My blood froze. These were the voices of men killed in the massacre. The 342 Texans executed by order of Santa Anna. They were calling through the veil between the worlds. The rain of blood intensified, transforming the plain around me into a carmesime sea. Ranger struggled to maintain balance on the slippery ground, his wild eyes of primitive terror. It was then that I saw the figures. They began as shadows in the blood rain, indistinct forms that moved against the impossible wind. Gradually, they gained substance, becoming recognizable as men in uniforms of the Republic of Texas. But they were not living men. Their uniforms were torn and stained with blood. Bayonet injuries marked their breasts. Some carried their own heads under their arm. Others dragged guts that unfolded behind them like macabre strings. They walked toward me through the supernatural storm, their faces contoured in expressions of pain and anger that transcended death. "Colonel Fannin," said a clear voice through the cacophony. I turned and saw a tall man in an official uniform, a bullet hole in the center of his forehead. "Did you know him?" "I met," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to keep her firm. "A good man, brave to the end." "Brave," repeated the ghost with bitterness. "Brave enough to lead us to death." Other voices came together, creating a choir of accusations. He promised that we would be prisoners of war. "Said we would be safe! Lied to us!" "He didn't lie," he said firmly, fighting the terror that tried to paralyze me. "Santa Anna broke the rules of war. Fannin did what she could." And where was Sam Houston? He shouted another spirit, he with a bayonet still crossing his chest. Where was San Jacinto's great hero when we needed him? The guilt I carried out for years exploded in my chest like an old reopened wound. I couldn't get in time. I did what I could with the strength I had. "Lies," they shouted in unison, their voices creating a roar that competed with the sound of the supernatural storm. The shower of blood intensified until it could barely see beyond a few meters. The world became a red nightmare where the dead walked. Between lightnings, just revealed more horror. It was then that a new voice cut the chaos. Stronger, more authoritarian than the others. Sam Houston. I turned and saw Colonel James Fannin himself emerging from the storm. Unlike others, he did not show fatal injuries. His uniform was impeccable, his perfect military posture. Only his eyes revealed that he no longer belonged to the world of the living. They were empty as deep wells. "Colonel," he said, continence by instinct. He returned the gesture with dark formality. "You carry guilt that it's not yours." "Like this?" "These men." He gestured to the furious spirits around us. "They died by my decision. I chose to surrender. I believed the promises of Saint Anna. You did what you thought best for your men. And it was wrong." His voice carried the weight of 6 years of remorse. "But you couldn't have changed anything. Not with the strength you were available." The other voices began to calm down, as if the authority of Fannin still commanded respect even in death. "So why are they here?" I asked. "Why do you confront me now?" Fannin looked at the bloody sky, where red lightnings danced among the impossible clouds. "For the injustice of our death has created a wound in the very fabric of reality. A wound that bleeds whenever someone carrying guilt related to us goes through these plains. His guilt," continued, "combined with our anger, opened this portal among the worlds. The storm is not natural. It is a manifestation of unresolved emotions." I looked around to the spirits of the dead soldiers. Their expressions of anger had softened, replaced by something like understanding. "How can I close it?" I asked. "Forgiving yourself," said Fannin simply, "and forgiving us to blame him for what was not under his control. And we," said the soldier with the bullet hole on his forehead, "we need to forgive you for not being the savior we expected to be." One by one, the spirits began to approach. Not in a threatening way, but as soldiers by providing their last continence. Each one spoke briefly. "Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for honoring our memory. Thank you for carrying our weight when you didn't need to. Thanks for winning in San Jacinto." The words of forgiveness and gratitude echoed through the storm, and gradually the shower of blood began to decrease. The red of the sky slowly gave way to natural tones of stormy gray. Fannin was the last to speak. "The guilt you carry does not honor our memory, just prolongs our suffering. Release it, Sam. Allow us to rest. As living, leading, building Texas for which we die." A natural wind began to blow, dispersing the spectral figures as a morning mist. His voices faded gradually, but Fannin's last words clearly echoed. "Remember, us not how we die, but why we choose to fight." And then they are gone. The natural storm that followed was intense but normal. Real rain, real wind, lightning that illuminated rather than revealing horrors. I found shelter under a lone oak and waited for it to pass, finally calm by my side. When the sun reappeared, the plain was clean. There was no traces of the supernatural storm, neither blood, nor viscous mud, nor signs that something impossible had happened. Just a sense of lightness in my chest that I haven't felt for years. I completed my mission in Goliad for the next 2 days, negotiating trade agreements that would benefit both Texans and Mexican. But my mind constantly returned to those moments, in the storm, when the dead gave me permission to live without the weight of their deaths. I went back to Houston City with a different perspective on leadership, responsibility, and the price of freedom. The men who died in Goliad did not want to be remembered as victims of my failure. They wanted to be honored as heroes who chose to fight for something bigger than their own lives. Years later, when I became governor of the state of Texas, I always kept a Fannin portrait in my office, not as a reminder of guilt, but as an inspiration to lead with courage and wisdom. There are times in life when the veil between the worlds becomes thin, when the dead can talk to the living on unresolved issues. That afternoon on the Goliad Plains, I learned that sometimes the forgiveness of the dead begins with the forgiveness of the living, especially the forgiveness we offer ourselves. Texas was built on sacrifices that we can never completely repay, but perhaps we can honor them living on purpose, leading wisely, and remembering that even our failures can serve greater causes than our own guilt. If reports like this touch something deep in your soul, if they arouse reflections on responsibility, forgiveness, and the weight of leadership, there are others that value these stories where the past finds the present. Sometimes the most important lessons come from places where we least expect them to find them. In storms that test not only our courage but our ability to forgive and move on.